Hello everybody, it's Verda here, and today we're going to be benchmarking the GTX 1650 GDDR 6th edition of the graphics card inside of XDefiant. We're going to be pairing it up with the Intel Core i7-4790K today with 16GB of DDR3 1600 megahertz RAM, rather 16,000. That was pretty insane, but yeah, we've got the latest video drivers. So with that, let's jump on in and see what we're going to be benchmarking. All right, so to begin with here, we're going to be playing at 1080p. I am using the lowest settings here in the game. It says custom because I had to go ahead and turn off VSync. The lowest settings are all of the presets turn VSync on by default, so turning that off sets the graphical quality technically to custom, even though it's just VSync. Everything is at lowest settings, so just take a quick peek here. Also, it sets the resolution scale to 75%, so I put that to 100% as well. And yes, it just scrolled through really fast. It's a really weird bug with the menu in this game. But as you can see, it doesn't actually set everything to the lowest, but this is low presets. So let's go ahead and jump in and see how it runs here in a game of XDefiant. So today I'm actually going to be trying out something different. I am not playing live right now, as you can clearly see. I am just watching over the video myself, and this is in post, because I feel like this is going to allow me to better explain what we're seeing here, the performance in the game, and my experiences playing the game as well, rather than trying to do it live, because it's pretty hard to benchmark and do this live in an FPS game that's fast-paced like this one. But as you can see here with the GTX 1650 GDDR6 edition of the graphics card, which is important to note, because the GDDR6 edition is a little bit faster than the GDDR5 edition. You can see here at 1080p low settings, not technically lowest settings that you can play with in the game, we are getting an average of around 116, 115 FPS. And when I do die and respawn, my GPU utilization does drop, because clearly we have some sort of CPU bottleneck there when I'm respawning. But when I'm actually playing, as you can see, the GPU usage is pretty much staying maxed out here, which is pretty impressive considering that this CPU is 10 years old at this point. And I know we're here for the GPU, but I always like to mention that, because yes, the GPU is pretty much maxed out nearly all of the time here. You can see in some occasions it does drop down into the high 80s, low 90s, but for the most part completely utilized at around 115 to 120 FPS. The 1% lows, not too impressive, only at around 60 FPS. Still perfectly fine if you play at 60 Hz, and do mind the gameplay, by the way. It's not that good because I was playing on a 60 Hz monitor, and my eyes really struggle to play at 60 Hz. It actually physically hurts me to play like that, but that's the monitor that I had the PC connected to, so that's just kind of what I dealt with. But yeah, as you can see, for the VRAM for the GPU as well on the low settings, it's only utilizing 1.7 gigs of VRAM. So you can play this game maybe at lowest settings with a 2GB graphics card, in all honesty. It may be possible. If you're still running with a 2 gig graphics card or 2 gig VRAM graphics card, do let me know in the comments on how is it running for you, because it clearly looks like here at the low settings, it's not using that much at all. It is allocating nearly 3 gigs of VRAM, but the actual utilization is only at 1.7 gigs right here. And as for the actual RAM usage, we're not even using 9 gigs right now with this game. So yeah, that's going to do it for the low settings. Let's go ahead and try out the medium settings. Alright, now we're going to be benchmarking 1080p using the medium preset. It says custom again, of course, having to turn VSync off every single time here, but yep, these are the medium settings. We've got resolution scale set to 100%, which it stays at medium, at least for me, it would seem. But everything else at medium, it's really speeds through those middle settings. I can't do anything about that. It does it every time in this menu. But yeah, let's jump on in, see how it runs here. So here at medium settings, we are seeing an average of around 80 to 85 FPS right now. We are on a different map, which may be more or less demanding. I'm not sure. More testing has to be done on this game to figure out which maps are more intensive and which ones are less intensive. But we are seeing that average of around 80 to 85 FPS. 1% lows are a little bit worse. We're at about 50 this time, which is not fantastic. You can see the frame time graph is a little bit more jittery. We are, of course, still completely maxing out the GPU here, as you would expect since we were maxing it out at low settings. In terms of VRAM usage, we are creeping up. We're at 2.3 gigs roughly, and it does increase the longer I play here. But right now, it seems like medium uses around 2.3 gigs of VRAM, so you are going to need at least a 3 gig VRAM card to play this game, it would seem, at medium settings. The FPS is quite considerably lower than low settings, and I would personally prefer the higher FPS and play at low settings or even lowest, like by manually going through and adjusting everything. But yeah, you're still going to see above 60 FPS, above 75 FPS most of the time here with this GPU. And as you can see, the RAM usage is still there at around 9 gigs, so it's still totally fine here at medium settings for a more casual player. But then again, this is a more competitive, you know, fast-paced shooter, so you probably want more FPS than this to play this game. But yeah, if you're not too fussed about the FPS and you want better graphics, it can clearly play here at around that 80 FPS range. Alright, so we're at 1080p high settings now, and I'm probably going to just stick to high settings because realistically I think anybody with a 1650 is playing at 1080p, at least a FPS kind of game they're playing at 1080p, right? So let's go ahead and have a look at the settings here. It does say custom because obviously I had to turn VSync off before restarting the game. But yeah, everything is on the high preset. It does still speed straight through that part, but I'll quickly show you again. There it is, all on the high settings. So let's try it out. So as we jump in here to the high settings, we are on, again, a different map because I'm not sure how many maps there are in this game, but we are playing on some sort of snow map, some sort of ice map. I'm not sure, maybe we're in Siberia or something. But as you can see here, we are at around 70 FPS on average. 1% low is very similar to the medium settings. As you can see, 51 FPS for the 1% lows. The frame time graph is a little bit less smooth. As you'll see, the higher up that we go in the graphical presets, the worse the frame time graph is naturally. As for VRAM usage, we were still hovering around 2.2 to 2.3 gigs VRAM usage. It did increase gradually as I played the mission a little bit longer, or the match a little bit longer. But yeah, 3 gigs is still more than enough here. This graphics card, of course, has 4 gigs of VRAM, so it's more than enough to play this game, which is pretty surprising. It's very nice that a new game that's come out, a new FPS game, is very playable with such a budget end, especially it's getting a little bit old now. It's like 4 years old, so you know, budget cards tend to fall off a lot earlier than mid-range to high-end cards, of course, since they're budget. And that's why I feel like their value is not as good, because they do tend to just, you have to replace them so much sooner usually. But with this card here in this game, for somebody who's more casual, even at high settings, you can still play at around 60 FPS. It does dip down a few times when there's a lot of particle effects and stuff going on. I did see some mid-50s, low 50s as I was playing. Still, what can you expect for such a budget end card? Alright, to end this video, we're going to be playing at the Ultra preset, still at 1080p of course. It says custom because turning VSync off, like I've mentioned every single time here. But yeah, we're using the Ultra preset, which doesn't actually make everything go to the maximum, which I absolutely hate games that do this, that make an Ultra preset yet don't apply everything to the maximum. But yeah, it's fairly high settings, it's just not completely ultra, and I'm not going to max everything out because with a GPU like this, realistically, you're not going to want to do that anyways. You're going to want to lower some settings probably, but let's jump on in and see how it performs here with the ultra preset that the game devs have made, essentially. And once again, like the other presets, it looks like for ultra settings, we are going to be playing on, again, another map. We're on some sort of city map. It looks like New York or something. I'm not sure exactly where this is supposed to be, but we are seeing pretty unplayable FPS here, ultra settings. I mean, which is to be expected. It is ultra settings. Like I've said before, if I was going to play with this card or even other cards, I'd probably play on lower to medium settings just to get much more FPS, especially with a 1650. You do want to play on very low settings to get that extra performance out of your card, of course, but we are going to see averages just below 50, which is not ideal. It's actually pretty bad for a FPS game for sure, and the 1% lows are pretty abysmal too. We're actually below 40 FPS for the 1% loads, which is pretty bad for a fast-paced shooter like this. As for VRAM usage here, ultra, pretty surprising. It's only using 2.5 to 2.6 gigs of VRAM, which for ultra settings at 1080p in a modern FPS game, it is pretty surprising that we can play with such low VRAM usage here. Now, granted, the graphics aren't exactly anything too spectacular. You know, it reminds me of a game that released, you know, like back in 2017, 2016 maybe, like, which is quite a while ago now, in terms of how good the graphics are. It kind of reminds me of like Rainbow Six Siege, but faster paced, you know, in terms of how the graphics look. And Rainbow Six Siege is getting a bit old now, but not to say that the graphics are bad, it's just they're not as good, which I'm totally fine with if we get better performance, right? I'd rather have a game that runs a lot better and doesn't necessarily have amazing graphics, as long as I can actually play the game. And it is nice to see that budget players or people with very strict budgets who just don't have very good computers can also enjoy this game. As you can see, 10-year-old CPU, 4-year-old GPU, budget GPU, I will add to that. 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM as well. 16 gigs is an okay amount, but it's nothing spectacular. It's like pretty much lowest RAM amount that you want to have in 2024 for gaming, for sure, for most games. You definitely don't want to be rocking around with an 8 gig system these days, because even Windows can have some funky stuff going on with 8 gigs of RAM, in all honesty. But yeah, RAM usage did increase on this map a little bit. As you can see, we're at just over 9 gigs RAM usage roughly here on average, but yeah, it's totally fine. So in conclusion, it's pretty surprising to see a new game coming from Ubisoft that's an FPS game that actually runs so well. Yes, the graphics aren't amazing, but the fact that it runs on a GTX 1650 is pretty insane, and a 10-year-old CPU at this kind of FPS, it's pretty nuts. So yeah, let me know what you think about this video style in the comments, and leave me a like if you found any value out of this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time guys, take care of yourselves and goodbye for now.